You are not obsessed because he is special, and you are not stuck because you are weak. You are stuck because your nervous system learned something very specific about love, and now it keeps repeating that lesson in different people. Let's go deeper than surface level advice, because this is not about move on or choose better. This is about why your mind bonds harder to what is inconsistent, unavailable, and emotionally unpredictable. And once you understand it, you stop blaming yourself and you start seeing the pattern for what it actually is. You meet him and he is not fully available. He is charming, attentive in moments, sometimes deeply engaging, and then suddenly distant, quiet, confusing. But instead of stepping away, something happens inside you. Your attention increases, your thinking increases, your emotional investment increases, not because the connection is stable, but because it is uncertain. And that uncertainty becomes the center of your mental world. You start asking questions you don't even realize you're asking. What did I do wrong? What did that message mean? Why is he different today? Is he pulling away or just busy? But the real question underneath all of them is this: how do I get him back to how he was? And that is where obsession begins. Not with love, but with searching. Here is the psychological mechanism most women never get taught. Your brain is not designed to bond most strongly with consistency. It bonds most strongly with unpredictability. When emotional reward is inconsistent, your brain enters a heightened state of attention. It starts monitoring patterns. It starts scanning for signals. It starts trying to predict the next emotional hit, and that creates a loop. A moment of attention feels powerful, then silence creates anxiety. Then return creates relief, and over time, your nervous system doesn't just like him. It starts organizing itself around him, not because he is right for you, but because your brain is trying to resolve unpredictability, and the mind always obsesses more over what it cannot predict. At this stage, you don't just like him, you mentally engage with him constantly. Even in his absence, he is present in your thoughts. You replay conversations, you reinterpret tone, you analyze timing, you try to decode meaning from minimal information, and you call it overthinking. But it's not just overthinking. It is emotional regulation through mental activity. Because when someone is inconsistent, your nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to relax. So your mind stays active, trying to restore certainty, trying to find patterns, trying to make sense of something that is not consistent enough to make sense of. And here's the hidden shift. You stop experiencing the relationship directly. You start experiencing your thoughts about the relationship. That is where obsession lives, not in the connection itself, but in the internal loop it creates. Let's name what is actually happening. This pattern is closely related to what psychology calls intermittent reinforcement. It is the same mechanism that makes unpredictable rewards more addictive than stable ones. The structure is simple: attention withdrawal, return uncertainty, and your brain reacts strongly to this cycle because it cannot settle into predictability. So instead, it adapts. It becomes alert. It becomes emotionally responsive to small changes. A message feels powerful. A delay feels threatening. A reply feels relieving. And slowly, your emotional system stops responding to reality and starts responding to variations. That is why emotionally unavailable men feel magnetic. Not because they are better, but because they are inconsistent enough to keep your nervous system activated, and activation feels like chemistry. But chemistry without stability is not love. It is arousal mixed with anxiety. At some point, your mind creates a dangerous interpretation. If I feel this strongly, it must mean something is real. But intensity is not proof of compatibility. It is proof of nervous system activation. Because emotionally healthy connection does something very different. It stabilizes you. It becomes predictable in a way that reduces mental noise. But if you have been conditioned in inconsistency, stability feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar often gets misread as boring. So what happens? Your system starts preferring emotional spikes over emotional safety, not consciously, conditioned. And that is why emotionally unavailable men feel more alive to you, not because they are better partners, but because they create emotional contrast. And contrast is addictive. There is another layer here that is even more important. You are not only attached to him, you are attached to resolution. Every time he withdraws, your brain creates an unfinished loop, and your mind hates unfinished loops, so it keeps trying to close them. If I understand him, I'll feel better. If I fix this dynamic, he will stay consistent. If I wait long enough, it will make sense. But emotionally unavailable behavior is not a puzzle, it is a pattern. And patterns don't require decoding, they require recognition. But recognition is uncomfortable, because once you see it clearly, you lose the fantasy of potential. And the mind resists that loss, so instead it keeps you thinking, keeps you analyzing, keeps you emotionally engaged, not because there is depth there, but because there is uncertainty there. And uncertainty is the fuel of obsession. At this point, your emotional energy is not going into building a relationship. It is going into managing internal discomfort. You are not loving him harder. You are regulating anxiety through mental focus. That is why it feels intense, because your system is constantly activated. And when your system is activated long enough, it starts to confuse activation with attachment. But attachment should feel like safety over time, not constant internal tension. If you are always in your head, you are not in connection. You are in survival mode disguised as connection. Here is the truth that changes everything. You are not obsessed with him. You are obsessed with the emotional pattern he triggers in you, because that pattern is familiar, it feels recognizable, even if it is painful. And the brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. So you keep choosing what you understand emotionally, even when it hurts you. But understanding this removes the illusion of mystery. Because there is no mystery in inconsistency, there is only repetition. And repetition is not love, it is conditioning. So what actually breaks the cycle? Not chasing clarity from him, not trying to fix your reaction, not forcing detachment. The shift happens when you stop interpreting inconsistency as emotional significance, when you stop turning confusion into meaning, when you stop believing that emotional intensity equals emotional value. Because once you remove meaning from inconsistency, it loses its grip. You don't chase it less because you are stronger. You chase it less because your brain stops mislabeling it as something important, and what remains is clarity, not emotional shutdown, not bitterness, just clarity. And clarity always sounds simple. I don't need to decode inconsistency to understand my worth. I don't need emotional unpredictability to feel connection. I don't confuse anxiety with love anymore. If you take one thing from this, take this. Emotionally unavailable men don't create obsession because they are more valuable. They create obsession because they are less predictable. And your mind was trained to chase predictability in chaos. But once you understand the pattern, you stop personalizing it, you stop romanticizing it, and slowly you stop participating in it, not because you stopped feeling, but because you finally started seeing,